Welcome. Today I'm going to share 3 tales about real individuals who, at some point in their lives, made choices that seemed utterly trivial at the time. However, over the years, those decisions would not only drastically alter their own lives, but, in some cases, profoundly impact the lives of millions of others. Before we dive into today's stories, if you're a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in a captivating story format, you've certainly come to the right place. We upload a new episode every single week, so if that interests you, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel, making sure to turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of our weekly uploads. Alright, let's get into today's tales. Story 1. The Actor Who Stole the Show. In the spring of 1986, a 22-year-old man named Will walked across the campus of the University of Missouri. He was just a few months shy of graduating with a bachelor's degree in journalism, but recently, he had begun to feel that he actually didn't want to be a journalist after all. He felt no genuine passion for it. He did, however, have a deep passion for Hollywood movies. Will had lived his whole life in Missouri, and the movies had essentially served as a magical portal to different worlds, showing him amazing places and people. That was his escape. With his senior year concluding and real life looming, Will had a major realization. He didn't want to be a journalist. Instead, he decided to drop out of college, literally weeks before graduation, and move to California, to Hollywood, to pursue a career as an actor in movies. Despite Will's incredible enthusiasm and naivety, when he arrived in Los Angeles, he quickly understood that he was not the only young person with this grand dream. There were countless aspiring actors and actresses who loved Hollywood and wanted to break in, all competing for the same roles in the same films. This didn't deter Will. He constantly went out and auditioned. He didn't care what film it was. He just wanted to be in one. But he simply wasn't getting the work. He was auditioning and being rejected repeatedly. Will was fine with the rejection, figuring he would improve and eventually get cast. But the real issue was his finances. Living in Los Angeles was expensive and good jobs were scarce. During the day, Will wanted to focus solely on auditioning. Therefore, the only work he could reasonably take were side gigs. He could work late at night or early in the morning. Except again, with so many aspiring actors, virtually all the decent side jobs in LA were already taken, or weren't. The only ones available to Will were the absolute bottom of the barrel, gigs, the ones nobody wanted. But Will was determined and willing to take whatever was available. He eventually landed 2 jobs. He worked as a mascot for a fast food chicken restaurant, standing outside in a chicken suit to encourage customers to enter. And at night, he worked as a limo driver for a very specific group, the strippers who serviced bachelor parties. It was Will's job to drive them to and from these parties, then go inside to serve as the DJ, playing music. And at the end of the night, he was responsible for collecting the money and clothes scattered about, packing everyone and everything back into the limo and driving them home. At first, Will accepted this life as temporary. He believed he would break into Hollywood, and then he wouldn't have to wear the chicken suit or drive the strippers anymore. But quite quickly, Will realized the opportunity to break in wasn't materializing. Instead, he was spending most of his time as the chicken suit guy and the stripper driver. Because these jobs didn't pay much, he had to encroach on his daytime hours, working more when he would rather be auditioning just to pay his bills. When he did audition, he continued to be rejected. Before long, it felt like he was just working these 2 awful jobs all the time, barely sleeping, just so he could be rejected over and over. It was depressing. He decided to quit one of his jobs. He would quit the limo, stripper job, and just keep the chicken suit gig to buy a little more time during the day to audition. If he failed after a while, his big dream likely wouldn't pan out, and he would have to move back home. But on Will's final shift as a stripper driver, one of the strippers said something to him that completely changed his life. While driving her around, Will struck up a conversation with this woman. She was a stripper, but by day she too was trying to become an actress. Stripping was her side job to afford life in LA while trying to get into the industry. During the conversation, she told Will that, in addition to auditioning, he should take a particular acting class. There is this one great class that all the biggest and best aspiring actors and actresses are taking, and many successful actors have taken it. This is the one to get into. You really ought to devote some of your daytime to going to this class. Will appreciated the advice, but he felt it wouldn't help him immediately. I don't need to learn how to act. That will take too long. I need action. I need to audition and be given a role, and my training will be on the job, learning by acting, not by training to act. However, as he was driving around and she kept praising the class, he thought, you know what? My auditions haven't gone well. Maybe I'll just go to this class once. She's going to be there. I'll go with her. Maybe it will be good for me. So he agreed to go. Soon after this pivotal final shift, he went to the acting class. The stripper was excited to see him. He found a seat, and at one point, the instructor told them to pair up with others and act out a scene in front of the entire group. Will was randomly paired with another actor who, in fact, had a genuine audition that night. The scene they were going to act out was going to be performed in front of actual agency representatives who had come to the class. They were there literally to see the other actor do this specific scene, 0822, and hopefully land the part. Will knew this. Okay, I'm going to read these lines, and you're going to be the one really auditioning here. When they did the scene, Will, who was truly just trying to be a good supporting partner, was so unbelievably talented. His emotions shone through so beautifully that he completely overshadowed the other actor. He emerged looking like the star he thought he was. The agency representatives were so blown away that they actually didn't cast the other actor. They basically said, no, we're not interested in you. We're going to cast Will in this role. Will literally stole the role from the other actor. This moment became so iconic and talked about that people started buzzing about Will in Hollywood. Wouldn't you know it, it led to his big break. Will began getting cast left and right as the lead actor. The starring role in Hollywood hit after Hollywood hit. 950. Today, Will is one of the most famous and celebrated movie stars ever to live. He's won everything from Academy Awards and Golden Globes to People magazine's sexiest man alive. Will is his first name, but he is better known by his middle name, Brad Pitt, Story 2, the dancer who became an eternal icon. In early April 1945, a 15-year-old girl named Ida curled up on a pile of blankets inside the basement of her aunt's house in Velp, a small town in the Netherlands. Ida's stomach ached terribly, and she felt weaker than ever before. This was because she was quite literally on the brink of starvation. Ida was 5'6" tall, but her weight had plummeted to just 88 pounds. She couldn't walk, she couldn't stand, and she could barely speak. She was probably within a couple of days of actually dying. Despite the fact that her aunt and mother were right there in the basement with her, along with other refugees her family was housing, nobody had food to give her. To make this already terrible situation worse, Ida, her family, and the refugees had been literally trapped down here in this basement for months because it was far too dangerous to go outside. Going outside was a death sentence in itself, because World War II was raging right outside. Bombs were being dropped, people were being shot, and explosions were everywhere. The country where Ida lived, the Netherlands, had been under Nazi occupation for almost 5 years at this point. When the Nazis first took over, Ida had been a strong, energetic girl with dreams of becoming a professional ballet dancer. She was so young when the occupation began that she hadn't fully understood what was happening. But then, Ida's uncle, a prominent anti-Nazi activist, was captured and executed by the Nazis. This spurred Ida into action. She saw how serious this really was. She spent several years working with an anti-Nazi group called the Dutch Resistance, doing things like performing ballet at secret fundraising, events and smuggling resistance newspapers across the country. She even convinced her family to take in refugees and hide them from the Nazis, even though she knew that if they were caught, they would all be killed. All of this had given Ida a real sense of purpose. However, about 9 months earlier, the Nazis had cut off supply lines into the Netherlands. Since then, the entire country had been completely devastated. People had practically no food, zero access to medicine, running water, or electricity. Ida, like many others, began to starve. She became so sick and weak that she couldn't do any work with the resistance anymore. All she could do was literally just lie in the basement and wait to die. That particular day, as she listened to the sounds of planes, gunshots, and sirens outside, Ida prayed to God for help. But the only response she got was a high-pitched whistling sound, followed by a deafening blast. The floor shook, glass shattered, and everything went black. Sometime later, probably days, Ida came to. Unbelievably, despite the basement effectively being the target of a bombing run, she looked around and saw that the structural integrity had held up, and her loved ones, the refugees, and she were all still alive. But Ida wasn't thinking, "Oh, great, everything is fine now." It was more like, "Okay, the Nazis are getting closer. And if they bombed us just now, I'm bound to be bombed again. Or I'm going to starve to death. The end is right on top of us." But as she looked around, she realized something was very different. Over the last weeks and months, the constant bombardment of bombs, guns, sirens, and chaos outside had been near constant. But right now, despite having just been bombed, she was listening, and she couldn't hear anything outside. It was quiet. Her family was more confused than anything else. Eventually, they worked up the courage, and with the help of her mother literally carrying Ida, the group walked out of the basement to see what was going on. When they got up there, they found the streets were full of Allied soldiers. They saw Dutch people crying and hugging, saying it was all over. That's when Ida, her family, and the remaining refugees realized the Allied soldiers had liberated their city. For the first time in nearly 5 years, they were free from Nazi occupation. If that bomb had struck more directly, or if the war had simply gone on for just one more day, Ida could have very easily died in that basement. Instead, she survived. Shortly after emerging from the basement, the Allied powers fully eradicated the Nazis across Europe. The Allies won, and World War II finally ended. Ida, who basically shouldn't have been alive at this point, went on to have an unbelievable post-war life. Before the war, Ida had dreamed of becoming a professional ballet dancer. But during the war, she had suffered injuries and was affected by malnutrition, leaving her with long-term health problems that made full-time dancing impossible. So instead, she began modeling and acting, eventually moving to Hollywood. In 1953, 8 years after nearly being blown up and starved to death by the Nazis, Ida starred in a movie called Roman Holiday and won an Academy Award for her performance. Even though World War II had nearly killed her and taken away her dream of being a ballet dancer, experiencing the war so intimately had instilled an incredible poise, discipline, and a quiet strength in her that would make her one of the most successful actresses of all time. Ida was just her nickname. When she started making it big in Hollywood, she began going by her full name, Audrey Hepburn. Story 3. The Love That Invented a Life-Saving Tool. One morning in the summer of 1889, a 36-year-old surgeon named William Halstead and his head nurse, 27-year-old Caroline Hampton, stood in an operating room prep area at the Johns Hopkins Hospital in Baltimore, Maryland. Dr. Halstead was the surgeon-in-chief of this hospital. That morning, he and Caroline were getting ready for a surgery. Dr. Halstead was already prepped, and he was watching Caroline closely to ensure she followed his strict hygiene requirements. Caroline stood in front of a row of sinks filled with different cleaning agents. She started by washing her hands with scalding hot water and medical-grade antibacterial soap. Then she cleaned her nails with brushes and files. Then she dipped her hands in acid And finally, she finished with a 5-minute soak in a highly corrosive liquid called mercury. Bichloride. Dr. Halstead ran a very tight ship, specifically regarding hand washing, and this was the process he believed was the safest. Zureskouinterion. Dr. Halstead's theory that essentially nuking your hands with cleaning agents before doing anything medical made him unique at the time, as this was 1889, and hand washing was not very common, even in hospitals. Germ theory. The idea that illnesses can spread by invisible germs on our hands, which must be killed to prevent the spread of illness, was very new at the time. Truthfully, many doctors did not believe in germ theory, meaning they didn't follow what we would now consider standard hospital hygiene practices, like basic hand washing and regularly disinfecting tools and surfaces. Dr. Halstead was a huge proponent of germ theory and aggressive hand washing, so he had instituted this awful, multi-step hand washing routine for his whole surgical team at Johns Hopkins. The results had been fantastic. He had one of the lowest surgical mortality rates in the entire country. But despite that, people still considered Dr. Halstead crazy, including his own staff, who complained about the highly corrosive cleaning materials they were constantly rubbing all over their hands. That particular day, as Dr. Halstead and Caroline waited for their hands to air dry after repeated acid dips, he couldn't help but notice that when he looked at Caroline, her hands and forearms looked terrible. They were blistered and completely damaged from performing this process constantly. Dr. Halstead felt genuinely bad about it for two main reasons. One, Caroline never complained, even though this procedure he was forcing on her clearly caused her pain every day. This is why he had promoted her to head nurse. He admired her grit and determination. But the other, more significant reason why Dr. Halstead felt bad about Caroline in particular was because Dr. Halstead was secretly totally infatuated with Caroline. He had never told her this. He kept it completely inside because he thought he was too old for her and assumed she would never be interested in him. So he carried this intense love for Caroline and was very protective of her, though she didn't know it. That was why, when he looked over and saw her clearly in pain but not complaining, because of his love for her, Dr. Halstead began to question his hygiene process for the first time. He knew it worked, but at what cost? His beloved Caroline was suffering because of him. Worse, he was trapped. He would love to tell her she didn't have to do it, but if he made an exception for her and said, "Don't follow this process anymore," people would find out, and it would completely undermine his credibility. His entire philosophy was that everyone must follow the process to stop the spread of illness. If he didn't make her, what would that say about him? So, as he sat there watching Caroline dutifully prepare for surgery, Dr. Halstead seriously began considering if there was any way, any sort of workaround, that could maybe lessen the pain for Caroline, purely because he loved her. Fast forward to early 1890, so about a year after Dr. Halstead first started thinking about how to help Caroline stop hurting her hands. He was in his office looking at his desk, and on his desk was a small package. He hadn't opened it yet, but he was excited. He was also kind of nervous, but he felt like this was it. This was the thing he had been waiting for. Over the past year, Dr. Halstead had continued to iterate on how he could help Caroline. Eventually, he had a huge epiphany. He came up with an outside-the-box concept and pitched it to a company, saying, "Hey, can you help me make these?" And now, sitting in front of him, was the prototype of this strange thing he had come up with. Again, just to help his love, Caroline. Dr. Halstead took a deep breath. He walked over and ripped open the package. Inside were two strange-looking objects, 02328. He picked them up, left his office without hesitation, and hustled down the hallway to the OR prep room where he found Caroline. She was getting ready to wash her hands for an upcoming surgery. He stopped her and said, "Here." He handed her the two objects. He said, "Don't wash your hands. Just use these." With a confused look, and with her bloody and blistered hands, she took the two objects and said, "Okay." 1 week later, Caroline's hands and forearms were already healing beautifully. Also, over the course of that week, Dr. Halstead was so excited about his prototype and the progress he was clearly seeing in Caroline's skin condition that he finally worked up the nerve to tell Caroline how much he loved her. Caroline in turn told him that she was in love with him too. Before long, Dr. Halstead proposed to Caroline and they got married. However, it was not their love that would be remembered for generations to come. Instead, the only reason we know about these two is because of that prototype. Dr. Halstead created what he gave to Caroline that ultimately saved her skin. It was the perfect workaround to his strict hygiene hand-washing process. In fact, these objects he created were so effective that he and everyone else in medicine across the world began to use these brand new tools. So it is almost entirely because of one man's love for a woman that we now have arguably the most used medical tool in the world. Dr. Halstead inadvertently created the world's first ever rubber surgical gloves. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know what you thought of today's episode in the comments. And remember, we have hundreds of videos for you to binge right now. But if you're looking for a recommendation from me for that one video that's truly worth your time, well, it's this one right here. Placeholder for suggested video end screen. Alright, until next time. See ya.